Have you ever stopped to think about why our world works the way it does? Why we have jobs, live in massive cities, or can buy stuff made on the other side of the planet? Well, it all goes back to one explosive period in history, the Industrial Revolution. Today, we're going to dive into how just a handful of inventions completely rewired everything. So to really get a feel for what we're talking about, let's look at something simple, a t-shirt. Back in the 1700s, to make one shirt by hand, you're looking at around 200 hours of pure manual labor. That's insane. But today, a machine can spit one out in about 15 minutes. That incredible, almost unbelievable leap in speed and efficiency, that's the core of our story. Okay, so to really appreciate the earthquake that was the Industrial Revolution, we have to rewind and look at the world before all the machines showed up. For thousands of years, life had a totally different rhythm. It was a slow, quiet, handmade world. Think about it. About 90% of everybody was a farmer. Your whole life was tied to the land, and you probably lived and died within just a few miles of where you were born. Everything you owned, from your shoes to your chair, was made by hand. Life wasn't ruled by a clock. It was ruled by the sun and the seasons. So the big question is, why? Why did this massive change start in this one specific place, this small island nation? Well, it turns out that 18th century Britain had, kind of by accident, the perfect recipe for a revolution. It was like a perfect storm. First, you had tons of coal and iron right under your feet, the fuel and building blocks for machines. Then, you had colonies all over the world to supply raw materials and, just as importantly, to buy all the stuff you were making. You had rich people with money to invest, a stable government that wasn't going to collapse, and, this is a big one, a recent revolution in farming that meant more food and a whole lot of people who no longer needed to work on farms. And the first domino to get knocked over in this whole chain reaction was the textile industry. I mean, everybody needs clothes, right? The demand for British cloth was through the roof, and the old way of making it just couldn't keep up. Something had to change. And that change started with a pretty simple-looking machine, the spinning jenny. See, the biggest problem was that it took forever to spin thread, way longer than it took to weave it into cloth. The spinning jenny just shattered that bottleneck. All of a sudden, one single worker could do the work of 8 people, then 16, then even more. Productivity went vertical. But, if the spinning jenny was the spark, the steam engine was the massive explosion that followed. James Watt's design was the real game changer. Suddenly, you had a source of incredible power that you could put anywhere. You didn't need a river anymore. For the first time in human history, we weren't limited by the power of our own muscles, or the wind, or the water. And this new source of power didn't just run bigger machines. It completely changed how and where people lived. It gave birth to the factory, the industrial city, and a whole new kind of skyline filled with smoke. Before this, most people worked from home in what was called the cottage industry. You were basically your own boss. You set your own hours. Well, the factory system flipped that upside down. Now, you had to go to a huge central building. You didn't work at your own pace. You worked to the brutal, relentless rhythm of the machine and the scream of the factory whistle. And this shift acted like a giant magnet, pulling millions of people out of the countryside and into brand new cities built around these factories. And the growth was just mind-boggling. Take Manchester, for instance. Its population grew by 1,500% in a single century. That's not just growth, that's an explosion. But these cities grew way, way too fast. They were a mess. We're talking overcrowded, filthy, and dangerous. Buildings were thrown up with zero planning. There were no sewers or sanitation, the air was thick with smoke, and diseases like cholera just tore through the population. And for all the amazing innovation and progress, this new world came at a staggering human cost. And the people who paid that price were the first generation of factory workers. Life inside a factory was just brutal. You're working 12, sometimes 16 hours a day, 6 days a week. The noise was deafening, the machines were incredibly dangerous with no safety guards, and the pay was barely enough to keep you from starving. And if you got hurt, you were just thrown out and replaced. And maybe the most shocking part of it all, children were right there in the thick of it. Kids, as young as 6 years old, were working the same grueling hours, often doing the most dangerous jobs, like crawling under active machines or dragging coal through tiny tunnels, all for a fraction of what an adult earned. This quote here really captures how so many workers must have felt. This idea that they weren't people anymore, but just fodder, fuel for the machines, chained to this relentless cycle until they were just used up. So, yes, the suffering was immense, but the impact of this revolution was just as massive, and it was permanent. It didn't just change a country, it completely remade the world. I mean, just look at the raw numbers. Check out iron production in Britain. In just 100 years, it went from 17,000 tons to nearly 1.5 million tons. That isn't just growth, that's a total transformation of what's even possible. And of course, an idea this powerful couldn't be kept in one place. It spread like wildfire. First to other parts of Europe, like Belgium and France, then across the ocean to the United States, and eventually all the way to Japan, creating a brand new global economy. So when you step back and look at the whole thing, the legacy is, well, it's complicated. It's really two-sided. On the one hand, you got incredible technological progress, a new and growing middle class, and stuff became cheap and available to everyone. But on the other hand, you got horrible working conditions, massive inequality, and the start of widespread environmental damage that we're still dealing with. And make no mistake, this isn't some dusty old history lesson. It's all around us, right now. The device you're watching this on, the clothes you're wearing, the very idea that you go to a job for 8 hours a day, all of that is a direct echo of what started in those British factories hundreds of years ago. Which leaves us with one last thought to chew on. Their revolution was built on steam and steel. Right now, we're living through our own revolution, one that's being built on silicon and data. So the real question is, what's our legacy going to be? What will be the good? And what will be the bad that people talk about 200 years from now?